It's a Game of Thrones episode. Hello. Welcome back to See What Sticks, a podcast about everything and nothing. I'm Russell.
And I'm Ben.
And we're back yet again for another week. Ben, how did you like our super high quality intro this week?
I couldn't tell that it was not just sang by you. I thought it was pulled directly from HBO.
Yeah, I tried to contact the London Symphony Orchestra. I got no reply. You think I'm lying? I did send an email. I am 100% not kidding about that. However, we do have positive news on the podcast that we have the blessing of a Australian electronic music artist named Dyalla, who you may heard some of her music in Casey Neistat's videos. I reached out to her and she so graciously allowed us to use some of her music in our podcast, and if we do videos, I'm just going to cite her and put all of her links below. But the outro music to this episode will be a song by her, so stay tuned for that at the end of the episode.
Big thank you.
Yes,
for allowing us to use
big
that.
thank you. So Ben, how have you been this week?
Staying busy and on the precipice of jumping into the void of insanity, like always.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. I mean, you're in school, and I'm getting ready to start grad school, and yeah, Ben, you acquired a ticket to a thing this week that I also got a ticket for. What is that thing that we will be talking about as it gets closer to that time? It's a couple months off.
Right. We are talking about the International Furry Convention.
Hell yeah. You better get your chipmunk suit.
Pause for disgust. Pause for everyone's disgust. No, we're going to go to Lollapalooza in August. Lots of bands. Like, did we get a official account on the amount of acts that are going to be there?
It's over 170.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it will be my, I think, 9th time going. It'll be Ben's first time, and so I will guide young Ben through these treacherous waters and millions of people.
I am popping my Lala cherry this year.
Ick.
Icky.
Gross. Ben, I do want to show you something cool that I just got. Well, I haven't gotten them yet. They are coming in the mail, and I will explain to you off the air as how I got these, but I don't want to say too much right now. But these. I know this is bad radio.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, they're like Vans with zippers and stuff.
The zippers seem unnecessary, but
It goes with my aesthetic that looks like I'm the fifth member of the Strokes.
okay.
It just goes with my look that says, I am part of a defunct rock band. No, I'm not. I run a podcast.
Are you going to be wearing those when you see the Strokes?
No, I'm probably going to wear
I was going to say, I would advise not to.
I'm going to wear dad shoes. I'm going to go and buy New Balance shoes to go see the Strokes because my footsies are going to hurt. Because I'm guessing that's going to be Sunday of a 4-day music festival. And your boy is not going to want to be standing.
Yeah, you're going to want some New Balances with some Dr. Scholl's inserts.
Oh, you have no idea. I'm going to wear the daddest dad shoes ever. And they're going to be so comfy on my footsies.
And then jean shorts and a tucked-in t-shirt.
Mm.
You have to get the full spectrum of dad look.
Oh, 100%. I mean, do you know those Chubbies shorts, like the really short ones?
Yeah.
I would be lying if I said I didn't have multiple pairs of those. During the summer, I'm a big proponent of Skies Out, Thighs Out. Suns Out, Guns Out's a little overrated. So Skies Out, Thighs Out is the way to go if you want some nice toasty thighs. key to all of you out there, if you are as pasty as I am, make sure to butter up those thighs with sunblock. Otherwise, you'll look like Neapolitan ice cream, and that's not a good look. If you want me to explain that joke any further, DM me. So, Ben, on that really gross note, you said a gross joke, I said a gross joke. What are we talking about this week?
This week, we're getting ballsy Game of Thrones, and we're mostly going to be focusing, correct me if I'm wrong, on the HBO television program. Is that correct?
Yes, we will be. However, wait, before we start, do you want to do news first or second? Because we can do news after.
Let's knock out some news.
Okay, let's knock out some news. So, this is some piping hot movie and television news brought to you from Barstool Sports, from their movie stuff. And they filter theirs pretty well, and it goes along with what we talk about on this show. So, I'm always down for that. Okay, so the first thing that we will be seeing is James Gunn is back on for the director of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and he was also doing the now reboot, not sequel, reboot of Suicide Squad. So he's directing for DC and Marvel simultaneously. So what are you thinking about that?
Is back, baby. I'm very happy that he is back on the scene, getting his job he never should have lost in the first place.
Agreed.
Getting that back, and I'm happy for him that he is now working for both Disney, Marvel, and DC Warner Brothers. Like he's taken, he's pretty much doing like what J.J. Abrams did with Star Wars and Star Trek.
He really is. And I mean, yeah. Of course, he made a few bad jokes in 2012, but apologized, and then Disney still fired him, even though he was very adamantly sorry about what happened. Good job, Disney actually listened to fans and listened, I'm sure, to like shareholders who were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of this guy who's clearly proved himself to be a better person. Because I feel like if you fire someone who's already apologized, apart from being part of Disney before all of this happened, that's like saying if you make a mistake, we will never forgive you. And I think a big part of like growing up is learning from your mistakes and being like, ooh, that wasn't great. I'm a better person now, and I know I did something wrong before, but I'm a better person because of that. And that's a good lesson. And Disney, I'm happy Disney's actually let him back on.
And hopefully Disney and other media companies take a lesson and also don't react or, don't be reactionary off of bad faith arguments and pearl clutching that came from the people that were gunning after Gunn.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I'm very glad to see James Gunn back on, and I'm very, very excited now to see Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, because if it wasn't James Gunn on board, I wouldn't have been that excited. And I know they approached Taika Waititi, who did Thor Ragnarok, but Taika said no, it's not his project, and he said that, and he was very respectful about it, and I really like that. That other directors were like, dude,
yeah, good on him.
That other directors were like, dude, give it to James Gunn. Like, this is kind of his baby.
And the actors, all the actors and actresses in the Guardians movies were like, he's our guy. Like, this is the dude that gets this universe.
Yeah, and he makes those movies what they are, and I think out of all the directors, I mean, besides maybe Taika Waititi and Ryan Coogler, who did Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther respectively, I think James Gunn probably has the most amount of a fingerprint on his films, where that's James Gunn. Even the scenes that he directed for Avengers Infinity War with the Guardians, you can tell those are James Gunn written scenes. And it's incredible, so I'm glad. Next thing is we have a bunch of news from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We have our first poster, we have more images from set, and we have a trailer. All of which look great. And in this poster for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, with Leo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt and I have the exact same haircut. So I'm looking forward to it based on that alone.
Life goals achieved.
Right? The fact that we have the exact same haircut, yeah. What are you thinking about that?
Oh my god, I'm so excited for this movie. I get irrationally excited for any time a Tarantino movie comes out anyway, but this looks like Tarantino's going like full tilt, like almost comedy.
Yeah, it does.
And he's an exceptional writer to begin with, and he's always played around with like, you know, dark comedy and especially with his past. Inglorious Bastard was just a damn comedy as well, like in a lot of sections with that. Django had a lot of funny parts to kind of help balance out a lot of the heavier parts that are dealing with the slave or institution of slavery that we went through. And then Hateful Eight there was a lot of good comedic bits in that. So I think this one he's like just going straight up like
let's go comedy.
Yeah, and I think Brad Pitt gets underused as a comedic actor a lot. Like, he has such a perfect deadpan delivery.
Oh, yeah. He really sells it so well as Lieutenant Aldo Raine in Inglourious Basterds, which we talked about on the show. And that every line he says in Inglourious Basterds is incredibly well presented. Even if it's not a comedy line, even his serious lines are so good. And the lines he needs to be like the deadpan comedian, where he's like, arrivederci. Like, he just has like the worst pronunciation on purpose. It's so good. Like, yeah.
And if anybody hasn't seen him in the Coen Brothers Burn After Reading, do that immediately. He's the funniest part of that movie, and it's so good.
He also gets murdered in a closet.
Spoiler alert.
That scene in that movie is so shocking when that happens. You're like, what? Like, where did that come from? It's so good. I love Burn After Reading. That movie that's a sleeper hit. So yeah, good on Quentin for that. And then another piece of news: John David Washington will star in Christopher Nolan's next movie.
I saw that. As is par for the course for Nolan's films, everything is being pretty tight-lipped right now. Like, he has good like control over his films as far as what is released, what news is let out to the public. So nothing's going to come out until he's ready.
Yeah. And then also Robert Pattinson, who we may know from Twilight, and then Elizabeth Debicki will also be in the movie. I'm sorry, I don't know what else she's in, but she looks very familiar. And they're both going to be in this new movie. And for those of you who don't know John David Washington, he's actually Denzel Washington's son and was the lead in BlacKkKlansman. So he played Ron Stallworth, the real Ron Stallworth in BlacKkKlansman, and he did a fantastic job. So then we also have a little look at the new Bill and Ted movie. There's just like a kind of like a guerrilla marketing kind of thing they're doing. And then a few more Avengers trailers leading up to the new Avengers movie, which is called Endgame. And then the big piece of news for the week is the movie Us is coming out tonight, actually. The night we're recording this and the night this comes out, which is March 21st, 2019. And apparently people love it. So I will be seeing that this weekend, and Ben, I'm sure you probably will be seeing it as well.
I'll be seeing it tomorrow night. I am stoked for this, and I'm definitely taking a lot of self-discipline and avoiding anything about this movie other than the very first trailer. Like, I'm going into this fresh.
There's another trailer I saw at the beginning of a YouTube ad, which spoiled something for me that I didn't want to see. I'm not going to say anything, but it spoiled a piece of the plot that I'm like, damn it. But it's not like anything big, and I don't know much about the plot, so it may not have been a spoiler, but based on what I'm thinking from the first trailer and what I saw in the second trailer, I'm like, maybe it's a deliberate misdirect, but I did see something in it that I was like, ooh, if that's a spoiler, I'm going to be really upset. But that's no fault of the film. It's fault of the company that the film goes to for its trailer editing. And for those of you who don't know, when a film gets released, the trailer is edited by a different company than the people who make the film. So if you're getting mad at like Disney or whatever for making the trailer have too many spoilers, they don't do that. Another company does. I know for Disney, the ones who edit it is a company called Tiny Hero. The only reason I know that is because I interviewed for them for a job. So I have that little piece of insider news. That's not a slam on them. They seem like really good people. But that's who edits their trailer. It's not Disney. So. Final piece
Speaking
of
of Disney, what?
Oh, I think we might have had the final piece of news together.
Possibly, yeah.
Oh,
Toy
you
Story
go for
4?
it. Yeah, that was what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And I am not excited.
Really?
Really, really.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear these steaming hot takes.
Okay. I thought Toy Story 3 was a great conclusion to this series. You and I both grew up watching Toy Story, I'm sure. And I think this Toy Story, it'll probably be really sad if the trend of Toy Story movies is anything to be said for. But I don't know. The trailer looked interesting, but I'm like, I don't even know if I want to see this. Because of this podcast, I'll probably go see it and talk about it, but I wasn't stoked. I wasn't like, oh my god, a new trailer for this. Like, it wasn't like looking at something for the new Star Wars movie that no one's heard anything about, or Game of Thrones, or Avengers, or even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or anything else that I'm kind of looking forward to. It's kind of just like, okay, I'm kind of lukewarm on it, if I'm going to be honest.
I had a little bit more of a positive take with it. Cautiously optimistic, I should say. That'd probably be the best thing that I put it. I'm kind of living vicariously through my kids too. They love all the Toy Story movies, so I'm like excited for them.
Yeah.
But also, like, what's making me the cautious part is I'm just hoping that it doesn't turn out to be like a Cars 2 or like or 3 or Cars in general. I really just dislike the Cars franchise. But like, I hope that they keep a lot of the heart and emotion that Toy Story has had throughout its franchise and not just stupid, kind of jokes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have faith in the people that are doing Toy Story, the people that have been doing it since the beginning, minus John Lasseter, who is out because he was a sex pest.
Yeah, John Lasseter was the worst and is the worst. Yeah, ick. But you know what? I mean, I do agree. I think these movies are in good hands. I've only ever seen the first. Actually, I've seen the first 2 Cars movies, but I agree with you. Those movies, I have no idea why they got so popular. And it was just, yeah, I have no idea what was going on there in the minds of Disney, but I think we are in good hands. My next question is, when are we going to get the live action reboot of this? Because you know how we're getting a live action reboot of all of the original Disney films?
It will happen. Pixar has an amount of control over their properties to where they do have a say in that. Because when they were still an independent production house before they were actually like completely bought by Disney, I think they had something within their agreement to be like purchased by Disney to where they still have a pretty large amount of creative and licensing control over their properties. So that's why you don't see how Disney puts a lot of their classic movies, like, quote unquote, in the vault. There has not been a Pixar movie put in the vault yet because they don't. I don't think they want to be a part of that sort of like limited time monetization that Disney does with old movies like Cinderella, Little Mermaid, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does really make sense. And I think it's interesting looking at the Disney movies and looking at these live action remakes that we're getting with Lion King or The Jungle Book or like Beauty and the Beast and now Aladdin and then Mulan, I think the one after that is going to be like The Princess and the Frog and then Frozen. So we're catching up to movies that are still coming out now with live action reboots. So there's going to be an overlap. If that's a trend. If it's a trend. Oh, Pocahontas. We still have to get Pocahontas.
Yeah, we have to get the Pocahontas.
Tarzan.
Probably Little Mermaid at some point.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about Little Mermaid. I was never a fan of that as a kid. So, I mean, but...
Yeah, I'm going over my kids' library of movies right now, thinking like, what have they not done yet? I mean, shit, they've done Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
They just did that last year.
I heard that was really good. It's on Netflix.
It is. My kids enjoy according to their mom, so maybe I should sit down and watch it with them. But I never grew up really caring about Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, my parents read it to me as like bedtime stories when I was really little, and then I graduated to them reading me Lord of the Rings. And this is where we end up when your parents read you Lord of the Rings as a bedtime story. This is the creature that creates.
That's a big leap. Not even any sort of like stepping stones in between.
The Hobbit,
wholesome. Well, even the Hobbit has some pretty not scary moments, but like pretty intense for like a young kid that's just coming off of like Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, it was like Winnie the Pooh, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and like Harry Potter, like the first Harry Potter book. Was what happened, and this is the creature that gets created when you read your kid that before bed. It's like, sweet dreams, okay, Boromir just got killed, we'll talk in the morning. Just like, what? It's like, you have school in the morning. Yeah, this is what happens. So, if you want this to be an outcome, you're welcome. No, it was really cool. I'm happy about all that. So yeah, I mean, I was a big Mulan fan as a kid. I still love Mulan. I think that's my favorite, like, old Disney movie. That or the old Jungle Book are, like, my two favorites. I was a big fan of the Jungle Book as a kid. But Mulan, I'm hyped for. That's the one that I'm waiting to see because they need to get Eddie Murphy back as Mushu. Like, that's the one that they need to have him back as. Because you could have John Mulaney as Mushu. You know what? That's my casting. I want John Mulaney as Mushu in the new Aladdin.
I think that would cause a bit of a stir. Replacing an African American actor with a white one, as cool, as like amazing and funny as John Mulaney is. I think if they're gonna do any sort of casting, find an American comedian to do Mushu, because it doesn't necessarily. What's that?
I was going to say Hannibal Buress.
He would work too. I think he's a very good voice actor.
He would be hilarious. Just knowing Hannibal Buress and his comedy, that would be so off-brand for Disney, but in the best way possible. Like, that would get so many college kids and, like, adults into that movie. Just, like, on, like, the front, like, of the poster, Hannibal Buress in a Disney movie would just be so funny.
I think the biggest, like, kind of more obvious choice, but also a big mistake, would have been, like, Kevin Hart, if they put him. And I say mistake just as, like, I think putting him in, like, certain voice acting positions is kind of played.
Yeah, it really is.
Maybe it's just because I'm lukewarm to Kevin Hart's comedic style. Like, for other people, he can work for them. They can think he's hilarious. I'm just like, meh.
You know who would be really funny? Actually, Michael Che from SNL.
He would.
He'd actually be super funny. He has a stand-up routine. If you've ever seen Seth Rogen's comedy thing, it's like on Netflix. It's for Alzheimer's awareness and cure for Alzheimer's. Michael Che does a stand-up routine during it. He's super, super funny.
He is.
I think he'd actually be a great choice. But on that note, let's get into a topic that we have zero expertise on.
And that is Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. So, Ben, when were you introduced to the world of Westeros?
In the first season of the show premiered. I really had no clue what this was. I had never heard the name George R.R. Martin before.
Mm-hmm.
I had never read a purely a pure fantasy story like this before.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when HBO premiered it, and I just kind of read that this was a big budget show that was supposed to be geared towards adults with violence, sex, all the good trimmings that an HBO show comes with. I was like, okay, let's give this a try. So I watched it from the beginning. It did. I think the first season premiered April 17th, 2011.
Yep.
That was a month before I left for basic training.
Oh.
So I was able to catch the first episode or first few episodes, and I think I got on the rest of the first season after I had gotten out of basic training and established out in California.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's actually that's cool for a timeline. So I started the show actually at the end of season 1. I knew what it was at the beginning because I was in high school at the time, and I had friends who had read the books. This doesn't count towards the buying a Ben a drink jar.
You never explained that.
Oh, yeah. Every time I said this is different in the books than the shows, I owe Ben a drink at Lollapalooza.
I'm going to get drunk.
Yeah, it's going to be a problem. So I will restrain. This goes through all of our Game of Thrones episodes. So I will restrain myself from doing that. Because first, the series is called A Song of Ice and Fire, and we're going to get into why that's different than calling it a Game of Thrones later. Maybe a little bit in this episode, but I believe the term Game of Thrones is a misdirect for the overall arc of this story. A Song of Ice and Fire is a better title for it for a reason that we'll get to in season 7 and 8 on why that name is better than a Game of Thrones. So that's just a little thing to start off with. So I started the show then, but I was aware of what this was very loosely through friends because I was a geek in high school, and I still am. So I started then and went back, watched all season 1, and then season 2 I was caught up with everybody else. So Ben, where does Game of Thrones take place?
It is a fantasy continent, I believe, called Westeros.
Yes, which is loosely based on England and Ireland if they were in one long strip. And then there's Essos, which is kind of like the rest of Europe, but it's kind of a desert, and it's kind of Spain, and it's kind of Africa. And then there's Sessos, which we don't ever see in the show, but it is something that is, I don't even think, it's mentioned. It's mentioned in the show a few times, and it's mentioned in the books a few times, but that doesn't count either. But there is a southern continent that is mentioned a few times in passing. So yeah, that's a thing. So yeah, Game of Thrones takes place there. And do you want to start with the opening scene, Beyond the Wall, and then we'll start talking about what that is, and then kind of get into a loose description of what season 1 and season 2 are, because these shows are so in depth. Each episode is an hour, and you could do an entire series of podcasts just on Game of Thrones, and we will not do these justice. These are kind of for people to have a little refresher before season 8 starts.
Right. Yeah. If you're looking for in-depth stuff, I can guarantee you can find those podcasts wherever you find your podcasts. There's no shortage of Game of Thrones podcasts out there to really go deep into each episode per podcast episode. But anywho, the very first the series premiere, it starts with some a random soldier from the Night's Watch, which we'll get into all that here in a little bit. Basically, he survives an attack by what's called a White Walker. And this is kind of like a zombified, pale skin, like blue-eyed ghoul.
Yes.
Really, that you don't know a whole lot about them. And really, you don't know what the hell's going on in this scene at first. All you see is that this White Walker kills this Night Watchman's like two friends. I believe he's with their guy. Like takes their heads off, and he's like he just gets the hell out of there.
Yeah.
And the next thing is we're introduced to the series protagonist, Ned Stark, where he's the Warden of the North. He lives in Winterfell. That's it. Yeah. He lives in Winterfell. He's the king of that and the Warden of the North. And this guy from the Night's Watch actually makes his way to there, where Ned proceeds to decapitate him because he deserted his position at the Night's Watch. And so I guess we should probably get into why that's a big deal for him to like desert his position.
Yes. So, yeah, that is how the show starts. We also get a shot of like an overhead shot of all the decapitated bodies of the Night's Watchmen in a circle formation, kind of like in a hieroglyphics formation, which still has not been explained yet. It's a little lost, like where it's like, cool, we keep seeing this symbol all over Westeros and Essos. Hasn't been explained. Definitely has to do with the Children of the Forest, which we will talk about later. And so, yes, the Night's Watch is kind of like a prison sentence, but it's like joining a group of brothers. It's almost like becoming a monk, but you're like a warrior monk defending this giant 700-foot ice wall separating north from south. In the north, you have wildlings, which are these kind of nomadic people that the people in the south, all the kingdoms of Westeros, look down on as savages.
Yeah, it's like the difference between like barbarians and civilized people.
Yes. And the Night's Watch is designed to keep those wildlings and everything up north out. And when this Night's Watchman runs south because he's like, oh shit, I just saw this crazy thing. I think that was a White Walker. No one's seen a White Walker in like 1,000 years. So when he goes south and bumps into Ned Stark at Westeros, Ned is like, hey dude, you left your position, gotta cut your head off because abandoning the Night's Watch is a crime punishable by death. And that's the first lesson we get from Ned Stark is when you cut someone's head off, commit to it and look at them to know what you're doing. Like, know the act that you're committing. And Ned Stark is a just but very, like, strict kind of ruler. But he's a good person. He's, like, a very good-hearted person. But he's like, I know sometimes you have to do gritty things in life, but it's for the greater good. He's essentially the opposite of Boromir, who Sean Bean also plays. And
you can tell in where Ned executes this deserter, you can tell he's like, listen, man, I don't want to do this. Like, I feel for you, but this is the rule of law.
Yes.
And what kind of ruler would I be if I made exceptions like this?
Exactly. And after this scene, we are introduced to the rest of the Starks and Jon Snow. So in this world, when you are a bastard, your parents weren't married when they had you, your last name is Snow if you're from Westeros. If you're from Dorne, which is in the south, or you're from Essos, your last name is Sand. So Jon's real last name, we will learn about that later, but Jon's last name, because he's a bastard, he doesn't get the privilege of a real last name. His last name is Snow. So he's not from like House Snow. That's just kind of like Jon No Name is kind of what they call him. And we are introduced to him and his older brothers, who are Robb Stark. Then we have Jon. Then we have Bran, Rickon, Sansa, and Arya. And then we also have Theon Greyjoy, who is
like a foster child.
Yeah, he's like a foster child that the Starks have claimed because Theon's family, House Greyjoy, had a dispute with House Stark, and their bargaining chip was giving Theon to House Stark to watch over, to ensure there wouldn't be any more wars. So Theon is a little bit like a fish out of water here, but the Starks love him, and they treat him like a son, and they treat him like royalty there, because they understand he is out of place, but he's still part of the family now. He's kind of like an adopted-in son, to say the least. And then we meet Robert Baratheon, who is king of Westeros, and his wife Cersei, and Cersei's brother Jaime. Take it away.
Cersei and Jaime are Lannisters by family name. And Robert and Cersei have a son, Joffrey. They also have other kids.
Yeah, they have Olenna and Tommen.
Yes. But at this point in the show, Joffrey is the one that's the important one to focus on. So, yeah, Robert Baratheon, Cersei, Jaime, the whole other the rest of the Lannister gang, they're visiting because Ned and Robert, they go back a long way. They've been old friends for a long time. Robert is asking Ned to be his the hand to the king. Mm-hmm. Basically, just like really the best way to put it is like the king's right hand man.
Yeah,
he advises him in all policy, military maneuvers. Just basically like the king needs a second opinion. You go to the king's hand.
Yes,
because Robert is asking Ned to do this because the former king's hand, Jon Arryn, has died.
Yes,
and we're not exactly sure why.
Yes,
under mysterious circumstances.
And Jon Arryn is Catelyn Stark's brother-in-law. Because she is from House Tully. This is the Stark mom, so Ned's wife is from House Tully, and her sister Lysa is married into the Arryn family. So it's like her brother-in-law was just murdered, like the day before the show starts. So that's why Robert Baratheon comes to Winterfell, because it's like, ooh, hey, your brother-in-law just got killed. New idea. I'm going to ask my best friend, who is related to him, to take his place, because that's a really good idea. So that's kind of what's happening here.
And also, Robert wants his son Joffrey to get married to Ned's daughter Sansa, his eldest daughter.
And yeah, if you haven't seen this show, and you don't know who Joffrey is, think Donald Trump, but like an 11-year-old boy.
The most wretched little shit you could ever think of. Most entitled little fucking brat.
He makes he makes Draco Malfoy look like a saint. Joffrey is the worst piece of human garbage ever to grace the screens of televisions around the world. I feel so bad for the kid who plays Joffrey, because I'm sure that kid gets so much shit in his life now. I've never seen him act in another thing. I think he retired. I'm sure. After playing Joffrey for how many ever seasons he's played Joffrey, no spoilers here yet, that would destroy you. That would kill your career. Like, you couldn't do anything else, because Game of Thrones is such a beloved show, and everyone hates you.
Yeah, the only other thing I've seen that actor in was before Game of Thrones. He was when he was much younger. He had a very, very quick one-off scene in Batman Begins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a little kid that Batman gives the thing to.
Yep.
So yeah, that's that kid. So we meet.
Oh yes. Well, yeah, but yeah, going from that, Lysa,
mm-hmm.
she sends a letter. She sends a letter to Catelyn saying, like, hey, Jon was like murdered, and she thinks it was by the Lannisters, Cersei, Jaime, like that family, and she's like, I think that they're going to be plotting against Robert. I think they're going to try and do something to him. Catelyn tells Ned about this. Not much comes of it quite yet at this portion of the season, really. But the big reveal for like the very first part of the season is Bran. He's climbing up a tower. He actually witnesses love.
Yeah,
so we find out that they are in an incestuous relationship.
Yeah, so he sees a brother and sister, Jaime and Cersei, getting it on. This prompts Jaime, who at this time in the show is a real piece of shit, to push a 6-year-old out a window and cripples him for the rest of the show. At the same time, Bran has a dream where he sees a raven with 3 eyes, which becomes very important later. And Bran wakes up and asks the maester who lives there, and maesters are like a mixture between like a priest and a little bit of like a doctor and kind of like a learned person in each castle. And he asks the maester, like, hey, what's up with this? And the maester's like, that's weird. Don't keep, like, that's something there. Just don't worry about it. That's not important. Just don't worry about that. And then we're also introduced to everyone's favorite character, Hodor, who is a large individual who was a stable boy at Winterfell, and then had an accident that has left him with the ability to only say the word Hodor forever. And he watches over Bran. He's like Bran's guardian. Especially now that Bran can't walk, Hodor is kind of like his wheelchair. So Hodor just carries him around and makes sure Bran is safe and sound. And yeah, so that's who we meet. And then we are introduced to very important characters after this. And then we'll get through the season a little quicker because there's a lot of people to meet up front. We meet Tyrion, who is Jaime and Cersei's younger brother. And he's played...
How could I forget Tyrion? How did I forget Tyrion?
He's played brilliantly by Peter Dinklage. And Tyrion is a little person. And this comes up a lot in the show. But Tyrion is very obviously the smartest Lannister. He's the most calculated. And he's probably, I think most people in Game of Thrones, their favorite character. And then we meet maybe the most important character in the show besides Jon Snow. We meet Daenerys Targaryen, who is one of the last Targaryens, which is a house that used to run Westeros, but then got overthrown by Robert Baratheon, big fat guy we met earlier. He overthrew them. Now they're in hiding, and there's only 2 kids left. One of them is getting married off to Khal Drogo, who is this barbarian warlord with the Dothraki army. And the Dothrakis are these horse people. They're like horse warriors. And they're nomadic. And they're kind of loosely based off of the Huns. Or kind of like the Huns or any kind of nomadic tribe that was just conquering and was unstoppable. Like when they put their eyes on a piece of land, no one could stop them. And there's a very famous line and a very famous meme that's like, you would take on the Dothraki horde in a like open field, and there's like a Robert Baratheon meme with that, where it's just like the Dothraki horde. And we encounter what happens when you run into a Dothraki horde later in the show. It does not end well. So we meet him, and Khal Drogo is played by Jason Momoa, and this kind of kicked off his career in a big way, was playing Khal Drogo. A fun fact about that, people didn't know Jason Momoa could speak English, because as Khal Drogo, he only speaks Dothraki in the show, which is a made-up language, but he like has an accent down and everything. Jason Momoa is from the United States, but people thought maybe he was from like South America. People thought maybe he was from Europe. People like did not know where this dude was from and didn't know he could speak English. So I think that's pretty funny. And kicked off his career, and now he's Aquaman. So you see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, Daenerys, she's being pretty much like sold off to Khal Drogo by her brother,
Viserys.
Viserys, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we're going to pronounce these names a million different ways.
Oh, yeah.
So we apologize in advance. Viserys, he sells off his younger sister, Daenerys, to Khal Drogo in exchange for the Dothraki are like ships, an army, because Viserys, V.
Yep.
He the throne because their father, the Mad King, and they called him that because he was literally a madman. He was a terrible ruler, just murdering people left and right, and that's why Robert felt the need to overthrow him and dethrone him. But yes, the remaining Targaryens feel like they have stake in the throne, so they're going to try and mount a attack on King's Landing to try and take back what they feel is theirs.
Yes, their father Aerys Targaryen III was the Mad King, and he burned a lot of people alive with this magical green fire called wildfire, which you can't put out with water, and it's like magically enhanced. It's like a chemical fire essentially, and they actually burned Ned Stark's father and brother alive. So the Starks don't really traditionally like the Targaryens, which becomes a big thing in season 7 and 8. We will learn more about, there's a little bit of a beef there. So Viserys is like, we need to get back there. Our dad was king and was murdered and dethroned. And he was murdered by his hand, who is Jaime Lannister. So Jaime Lannister has kind of a bad name. He's also the person who's having sex with his sister and pushes a small child out a window. Maybe not the best dude. So they call him the Kingslayer because it's like your right-hand man murders you. Jaime Lannister probably rightfully did this because he saved a lot of people's lives. He's like, I need to kill this dude. This dude is bad news. He's going to murder me and everyone else in this city if we do not stop him. So Jaime stabs him in the back. So that gives Jaime kind of a bad rap. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. That's all kind of episode 1.
We need to speed through the rest of these season, or rest of the season and second one, or else we're
basically
going to be here for.
The thesis of season 1 is Ned Stark goes to King's Landing, and Ned Stark is a very honorable and good person and realizes Joffrey is not the king's son. He realizes that he is an incest baby between Cersei and Jaime, so the king's wife and hand of the king. And he's like, oh shit, this is big. He gets betrayed by someone named Peter Baelish, who he thought was his friend. Daenerys gets 3 dragon eggs, and she's like, wow, these are pretty dope. And her brother tries to manipulate her. Khal Drogo gives him a crown of gold, and he dumps.
This is my favorite death in the show.
Oh, it is my favorite
all time, and it happened all the way in season 1.
Yeah, this is. Oh, for those of you who don't know, anyone is free game to get murdered in this show. It is ridiculous.
Yes.
If you have a favorite character, odds are they're going to die. Odds are they are dead, or odds are they're not making it through. So yeah, Khal Drogo at this Dothraki ritual, this religious ritual, gets stood up to by Viserys, and Viserys is like, I'm the king in this dojo essentially, and Khal Drogo's like, no, you're not. And Khal Drogo's like, fine, I'll give you a throne. And he's like, I will give you a throne, and I will give you a crown of gold. And Viserys is like, oh, that was easy. And he takes all this gold he's wearing, puts it in a hot pot, and flips it over on Viserys' head, and kills him with molten gold. And it is probably one of the most visceral deaths I've ever seen on TV.
It's fucking gnarly.
It's gnarly, and it's so unexpected.
Yeah.
So that happens, and everyone's like, oh my god. And then we meet Lord Friendzone, Jorah Mormont, in this same episode. So Jorah Mormont is actually at the beginning sent from Westeros to spy on Daenerys, except he realizes maybe Daenerys is a good person and shouldn't be spied on and shouldn't be murdered. And he falls in love with her. Also, in the show, Daenerys is supposed to be 14. So when we go through people, I will kind of say what their ages are supposed to be. And I think Emilia Clarke, when she started playing Daenerys, was 19. So she looks really, really young. And they did a good job for casting all of these people to look young or look old when they needed to.
Yeah, I don't know how much they stuck with the age of say between the book and this, because there's some pretty graphic sexual assaults.
Yes,
in this happening to Daenerys, and so I feel like they kind of wanted to not really play with
the age thing
between minor and so they don't really harp much on her age. I think they just kind of she's young, but she whatever.
In the show, actually, I don't think they ever say how old she is. I think you can deduce how old she is from events saying this Robert's Rebellion where he killed the king was 15 years ago and Daenerys was just born kind of thing. So you could put it together if you did the math in your head, but they never outright say it. And then at the same time as this is all happening and Viserys, her brother, is being murdered, Jon Snow is being sent to the Night's Watch with his brother, or with Ned's brother, Brendan. Brendan becomes a very important character later, but in this, he goes north of the wall and you don't ever see him again. And people are like, whatever happened to him? We will learn more later, and we will come back to this in a few episodes from now, and people won't remember what we're talking about, but it becomes a big thing. Ben, I owe you a drink. It's a big thing in the books. And it's still a mystery in the books that has not been solved, but it has been solved on the TV show. So, that's the thing. So we teleport back down to King's Landing where Honorable Ned Stark is, and he's like, oh shit, this kid is not the rightful heir to the throne. Robert gets killed by a boar out hunting. He gets overly drunk, maybe on purpose, maybe not, maybe on purpose, and now he's out of the way, and then technically speaking, who should take over is Hand to the King, should be king in his stead, because Joffrey, the king's son, is too young to rule. They'll have to wait a couple years, because I think Joffrey in the show is supposed to be 11, and I think in the show you're not allowed to become the actual king till you're 14 or 15 or something. So there's something like that. So technically the next person to take the throne should be one of Robert's brothers. He has two brothers, Stannis and Renly. Stannis is Robert's next youngest brother, and then Renly is his much younger brother. Stannis is hey, that throne is for me, my brother's dead, and that's going to cause some issue in season 2. Renly is the much younger brother, and for a few reasons, he cannot become king, and we will get into that in season 2. It is because Renly, for a few reasons, won't be able to have a child. And we will learn about that. And so Ned Stark is betrayed and is like, yo, this kid is not legit. And he's put into a prison cell. And even Cersei is like, hey, we should probably not keep the king in the north, the warden of all of the north of Westeros, in a prison cell in our city. We have a bunch of other houses and kingdoms very mad at us, who give us money and supplies and everything else through trade. And if we put their leader in a cell, this looks very bad on us. So basically what happens is Ned Stark goes to trial. And what they suggest happens is they banish him to the Wall, where he can hang out with Jon Snow, his son. And people are like, okay, that sounds like a pretty good thing for him. But Joffrey, being a little fuck that he is, decides to kill him. He kills Ned Stark, the main character of the show, and they decapitate him in the last episode of season 1. Yes.
I don't think is it the last episode?
Oh, it's episode 9. It's not episode 10.
But not that it really matters. But Yeah, and he does it in front of both of Ned's daughters.
Yes.
Sansa being like up near it because as his wife because he's a little shit, and then Arya is out in the crowd of this public execution, and she is able to escape.
Yes.
King's Landing before she was going to be inevitably killed as well.
Yes. She's able to escape with one of Ned Stark's like bodyguards is in the crowd who like grabs her and is like, shh, like I will help you get out of here. Just like don't freak out. I'm gonna get you out of the city so they don't murder you as well because you are not safe here. And basically what happens is everybody freaks out that they just killed Ned Stark. That would be, I don't know if there's like, that would essentially be like, the only way you could like equivocate it is like if you had Justin Trudeau come down to the United States and get killed by the president. People, there'd be an all-out war, which is what happens. Is the North in Game of Thrones, all the Northern Kingdoms are like, oh shit, we're going to go kill an 11-year-old who just murdered our leader. And that's kind of how season 2 starts, is with Robert Stark, Ned's oldest son, who's, I think in the show supposed to be like 30 years old. So he's like old enough to become king. He is very much old enough. And he's kind of much older than all the other Starks. And he's like, we are taking them down now. And Tyrion is up in the north at the time. So they take Tyrion hostage. They're like, you killed our father. We have your little brother. Even though you don't like him because he's a dwarf, he's our hostage now. So you guys better do something. Otherwise, there's going to be blood on your hands or on our hands now. So season 1, also season 1 ends with dragons.
Yes. Because, Drogo falls ill to being stabbed.
The most anticlimactic death.
Right. He gets stabbed. Daenerys, like, at this point has kind of taken a liking to him because he's been teaching her the language, kind of just like, he's like, hey, you're my queen now, so let's get you in on this Dothraki culture and people. So she basically comes around on him. She asks this woman to or this kind of like medicine woman to hey, can you cure him? She puts him into like this coma, basically. So she gets killed. And then Khal Drogo, he dies along with the unborn child that is in Daenerys, who was supposed to be like, the next of kin for Khal Drogo. It was a boy that never gets born because it just dies in the womb. So they put Khal Drogo on like a pyre. They're send him off in like a Dothraki funeral, burn him, in this ceremony. She walks in. She just gets unclothed. She walks into this giant fire where her husband is burning, and then walks out. I think it's the next morning after the fire is out. She walks out like unscathed with 3 freshly born dragons that hatched out of these eggs, and everyone there that witnesses this is like, oh shit, we're bending the knee. Like, this woman is the real deal. Yeah.
And basically, the witch doctor's like, oh, I can save the life of your child. In Game of Thrones, magic doesn't work the same way as it does in like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Magic is kind of like really powerful, but no one knows how to wield it, where they're like, oh yeah, this thing is definitely going to work out, and it always backfires. It's kind of like an episode of Arrested Development. There's a plan, and it totally backfires and goes a different direction. So they tried to save Daenerys' child, but through the magic, they accidentally kill the child, but make dragons exist. So it's like you win some, you lose some whenever there's magic in Game of Thrones. So Daenerys is a force to be reckoned with now. And then season 2, people have now heard that there's some young girl off in Essos in a different country with 3 baby dragons. And people are like, oh my god, dragons haven't existed for 500 years. But they're skulls of dragons. And they're like, these things get big. These things are mean. And if you have them on the opposite side, they will kill everybody. Like, literally everyone. They're unstoppable. So we think. And as we've said before, if you like a character in this show, they will probably die. Ben, what is your prediction, knowing season 7 of Game of Thrones and having season 8 come out? Do you think any of those dragons are making it out alive?
I would say the most that will make it out is 1.
Yeah.
I don't... It's hard for me to predict whether it's just going to be 1 or none of them.
I think the dragon that's going to make it out isn't the one we think it is. Like, there's the names of the dragons are Viserion, Rhaegal, and Drogon. Drogon is the big one. Rhaegal is still around, and Viserion is out of the picture for a reason that we'll talk about later. I think Rhaegal is going to be the one that survives.
Okay.
I just have a suspicion, and we'll talk about that off air. There's a reason I think Rhaegal is going to live. Drogon, unfortunately, he's the coolest. Unfortunately, that dragon is not making it out of this show.
The coolest.
Cool. Yeah. Foreshadowing. So, yeah, that's season 1. We're going to power through season 2, because season 2, in my opinion, rereading all of these, is the least memorable of all of the seasons.
Yeah, with the exception of Blackwater.
Yes.
Which is kind of like the show's first big event.
Yes.
I would say.
So season 2 is a lot of planning things that don't happen. So season 2, we meet Renly and we meet Stannis, Robert's brothers. Renly is his younger brother who is gay, who is with what's his name? Tyrell, Marjorie's younger brother, who's Iron Fist. He's Danny Rand.
Yeah, what the hell is his name?
We didn't rewatch these to do this episode. We just went on the internet and reread them.
Yeah, we are both busy people.
Yeah.
To have powered through these shows.
Yeah.
It's like to watch sleep.
Yeah, I would have had to take a week off of work to do this. So Renly is kind of out of the picture, and Renly's kind of a good dude who's just like, hey, I'm here to kind of take the throne if I want to, but I'm sort of staying out of the picture, but I do have a calling to it. Stannis, on the other hand, really wants the throne and has a red priestess on his side named Melisandre. Melisandre is bad news. She's not evil, but she kind of has her own agenda, and she uses this thing called fire and blood magic and worships the god of fire and is like, the night is dark and full of terrors, and uses actual magic to destroy shit.
Yeah, she's definitely not evil, like you said, more misguided.
Yeah,
but she is so incredibly important to this show.
Yeah, and her magic is, out of all of them, the one that's the most misguided. Where she does these big magical things, but they always backfire. Where she gives birth to a demon baby monster, smoke, creature, devil, and it accidentally kills the wrong person. It accidentally kills Renly, Stannis' younger brother, and it's not meant to do that. And she's like, the Lord of Fire works in mysterious ways, aka I did not expect that one to happen. And Stannis on this is drinking the Kool-Aid hardcore, and we meet Sir Davos of Seaworth, who is probably my favorite character in all of the show. And Sir Davos is like, dude, this Red Priestess is bad news. He is literally like the audience for everybody. He's like, bro, no. Are you not seeing this? Like, are you not seeing what we're seeing here? This is crazy. So, that's kind of season 2. Tyrion is taken hostage. Tyrion is led up to the Eyrie, where House Aaron is, and that you see the moon door for the first time. It's really cool. It's like a castle that's on like a cliff over the ocean. We see that. We meet the Hound, kind of officially, and his brother, the Mountain. They'll become more important later, and we'll talk about them later.
The Cleganes.
Yeah, the Cleganes. We'll talk about the Hound and the Mountain later. They're both important characters, but become more important season 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Holy shit, there's a lot of these episodes.
There's a lot of episodes. There's a lot of people like that in these early seasons, like don't necessarily give off like an aura of like importance to them.
Yeah.
But they come back and they are important.
Yeah, there's a lot
like Gendry comes to mind.
Yeah, Gendry is, in many ways, might be the most important character in the show, and such a throwaway character in the first 2 seasons. There's a whole meme about Gendry rowing in a boat south, like in the ocean for like 5 seasons. You're like, where did Gendry go? And then we run into him in a season. You're like, oh yeah, I forgot about him.
Like, you exist.
And so season 2, in a lot of ways, we'll talk about Blackwater in a second. Season 2 is a lot of characters making moves for later seasons. And I know that's a big cop-out for talking about it, but it's a lot of details and a lot of characters moving throughout the map. A lot of Daenerys over in Essos kind of making her way towards a city called Yunkai, which is the first city she liberates. And we'll talk about that in season 3, her liberation of city and cleaning out Slaver's Bay and kind of becoming this very empowering figure to everybody around her. Is like, hey, I don't want to be evil like other kings and queens. I want to change the path. I don't want to be the same. I want to be here for good and help free people and help be a positive force instead of a negative force. Also, I have 3 dragons, so I will murder you if you try to stop me. Is her philosophy on life. So we get that. We have Jon Snow, who goes north of the wall to look for some Night's Watchmen who've gone missing. So he's pretty much north of the wall the whole season. And then we have King's Landing and a lot of like intrigue and political stuff with Varys, who's this bald guy, who's kind of like a little spider who like is pulling strings. But Varys, as we learn, may not be a bad guy. Maybe he just is out for his own good and out there to survive. Then we have Tyrion, who's still prisoner, and who makes his way back down to King's Landing.
Yeah, he makes his way back to King's Landing. He is appointed Hand of the King by
his father.
By Tywin.
Yeah.
Haven't really talked yet.
Tywin Lannister is the father of House Lannister, so he'd kind of be like Ned Stark for the Lannister house. And Tywin Lannister is probably a close second for my least favorite person of all time.
Yeah, he was, because at one point he was also the Hand of the King,
yes.
Hand of Joffrey.
Yeah,
and that's the way that Cersei really wanted it, because it was like, a true Lannister is in power here.
Yeah.
And not just like my little wretched shit of a son.
And even Cersei knows that her son is pure evil. And she like loves him because it's her son, of course, but she knows that this kid is bad news. And that he does not know what he's talking about. He does not know what he's doing, and he's going to be the death of everybody in the Seven Kingdoms. So we get to the end of season 2, and we have the Battle of Blackwater Bay. And Blackwater Bay is the bay that King's Landing sits on. And do you want to explain the parties involved in the Battle of Blackwater? The first event of Game of Thrones.
If I can get my cat away from my computer. She's literally walking on the computer.
Yeah.
All right, let me get my bearing here. Okay. So, Stannis Baratheon basically has his fleet of ships, like, heading straight towards King's Landing.
Mm-hmm.
Tyrion being back at King's Landing, he's the one that's appointed to, like, lead the defense. He's appointed to that position because, or, like, against his wishes. This is kind of like a humiliation tactic.
Yes.
Putting him in this position,
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of backfires against, because is it Joffrey or Cersei that puts him in this position?
Cersei.
Cersei, you're right, because she's like, little brother, like, we're gonna put you in this place where you're gonna be, out of your depth.
Yeah.
Among a bunch of like warriors, and you're this little person, like, what are you gonna do here?
Yeah.
But basically, Tyrion kind of makes the smart move that he puts an assload of wildfire, which we discussed earlier, into Blackwater Bay and ignites it as soon as or pretty much most of Stannis' fleet gets there, and he wipes almost all of it out.
Yeah.
Instantaneously.
Yeah. And Tyrion kind of becomes the hero, sort of with we're probably going to get killed here anyway, so let's try this. Like, it has to do something kind of approach to a battle where you're drastically outnumbered.
Yes, and he also convinces this group called the Cloaks, as Stannis's forces inevitably make their way and like hit landing, because they obviously do, and a massive fight and battle ensues. Tyrion kind of leads his men that he's put in control of. He leads him behind Baratheon's people, through like a bunch of like underground tunnels.
Yeah,
and basically they flank him. Basically, like this guy that no one really had any faith in, that being like a military mind. He's making all these moves that basically saves King's Landing from being taken over by Stannis Baratheon's forces.
Yes. And in this battle, you can think of it in a lot of ways like a reverse Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, where like there's a lot of similarities structurally, but like the good guys light off a giant bomb, and then the bad guys do a thing. So a lot of pieces are reversed, but it's a lot like the Battle of Helm's Deep, where one side is just drastically outnumbered, and they're like, let's just blowing them up. Let's see if that one works. And it does, as always, because when one side has a gigantic explosive device and the other doesn't, usually the side with the explosive device will get a bit of an upper hand. And then this battle essentially drives Stannis back, but shows how weak King's Landing really is, which is really big leading in to Season 3, which the battle at King's Landing gives the Starks in the north, who are kind of mounting an army, the confidence to try to take King's Landing from the other side, because they know King's Landing has just been weakened by this battle. So now an army from the north that isn't really with Stannis, but not against him, they're kind of like also vying for the same kind of position. It's like the enemy of my enemy sort of thing. Is going to make their way down to the south, but ends up at somewhere called the Twins with House Frey. And that's where Season 2 ends, is at House Frey with the Twins. And Walder Frey, who those of you who watch Harry Potter might know as Filch, is introduced at the end of this season. And there's an agreement that's made that says Robb Stark should marry one of the Frey daughters. And that's how this season ends, is on that. And Daenerys is making her way through Slaver's Bay. So that's sort of Season 2. It is a lot of just pieces moving on a chessboard. There's no real like checks. Not many people have been taken out or murdered yet. Not any big characters. It's just been a lot of moving on the chessboard in Season 2.
Yeah. And a couple other moves, I guess, that are significant, but they pay off later, like in Season 3. Theon Greyjoy, he begins to betray the Starks.
Yes.
So, and that's going to come back in a big way.
Yeah.
We get introduced to Brienne
of Tarth,
because Jaime is captured and then eventually released by Catelyn, thinking that if I release Jaime back to Cersei, maybe I can get my daughters back.
Yeah, just like a little trade deal.
Right.
And
Robb is none too happy to hear about that.
Yeah, and Robb's like, you just got rid of our last pawn, and Catelyn says, yo, if we didn't do this, she could just murder our kids. She just murdered, like, my husband / your father, and was cool with it. What's to say she's not going to murder 2 children? Like, if she's going to murder, a political leader, anyone's fair game for her. So she's like, this might be our only chance. And yeah, Jaime and Brienne are now venturing through Westeros back down south to where King's Landing is. And Joffrey is still a little shit.
Yep. And the last thing I can think of that's important or that will pay off is above north of the wall. John and Sam, they hold up at this dude's house.
Craster.
And at Craster's place where him and his like dozen daughters are all held up. And we meet Gilly, who's pregnant, and she basically confides in Sam, and they together.
Yes. And then at the same time in the last episode, we meet, we see dragons shoot fire for the first time in the House of the Undying. And then we meet someone named Quaithe. It's a girl in the show who has her face is covered by a mask of like these hexagons. And it's the same kind of hexagon that Melisandre wears around her neck. The Quaithe and Melisandre are part of the same kind of priestess organization. And Quaithe says a name called Azor Ahai. And we will get into what Azor Ahai means, but it is the prince or princess that is promised. And it has to do with something called the Battle for the Dawn against the Night. And this is why I said the name Game of Thrones might be a big misdirect for the entire show, because A Song of Ice and Fire might become a little more important than battling for a chair made out of swords. And that's the first time we ever get a sense of maybe there's something bigger happening here, is at the end of season 2, where we get a sense for that. But we don't really see any more things in the north yet. The White Walkers and all of that is kind of on hold. Actually, we do. We see a white for the first time. When they're back at Castle Black in the middle of season 2, there's a dead person that they bring back into Castle Black to bury. He comes back to life with blue eyes. And Jon Snow lights him on fire to try to stop him, and that kills him. And they're like, what was that? We've never seen a dead body come back to life. And that's kind of how the season ends. So, Ben, this may have been the most rushed explanation for 20 hours of TV. But what do you think of Game of Thrones so far in season 2, thinking back to when you saw it or when you rewatched it?
So I distinctly remember when I was watching the second season, is the kind of the one of the first times I thought, like, there is a lot going on, and I really need to go back over a lot of this.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that's like a fault of the show, because everything that's or I would say most everything that's going on does have a point.
Yes.
It does have a payoff throughout the show, or throughout the show's run.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that there was a lot of like, just, it's a lot to kind of keep in mind. And, even now, or even in like last season, and I'm sure because upcoming final season, there's going to be, previously ons or callbacks in the actual episodes themselves, where I'm going to be like, when the hell was that?
Yeah.
Because it's such a busy show.
It is a really busy show. I think season 2 was when I first started going on YouTube and looking up episode recaps and looking up episode like breakdowns. And I mean, I'll shout out a few channels. There's one called Alt Shift X, which is really good, that does Game of Thrones breakdowns, that I'll link in the description of this podcast. There's another one called Emergency Awesome. They're the two that I always go to kind of get a filler on Game of Thrones. Because after an episode's over, they upload within the next 6 hours. So by Monday morning, then I can like look that up, and they'll be like, okay, so what happened yesterday? And these guys, the guy from Alt Shift X and then the guy from Emergency Awesome, are both really big fans. They're like the level of Game of Thrones fan that I'm like a Lord of the Rings fan. And they know every detail. They're like, well, the reason Catelyn did this is because blah, 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 blah. And they'll relate it back to the books. They'll relate it to this. They'll relate to that. And it really helps you break down each episode. And it really, really helps you get up to speed with what's happening. If maybe you didn't just read the books, or maybe you didn't just do this, or maybe you weren't familiar with this and you don't remember all the names. Another thing is season 1 and 2 are exactly the books. Every season breaks a little farther from the books. So seasons 1 and 2 are pretty much a Game of Thrones, and then a sort of, or
is it
Storm
Clash of Kings?
Clash of Kings, and Feast for Crows, Storm of Swords. What is Winds of Winter?
Something.
Winds of Winter. Then is it A Song of Spring? Are the last two that come out? Maybe.
Let's find out.
Yeah, let's look up all the names. I might have had them out of order. I have them downstairs.
So there's a Game of Thrones, a Clash of Kings, a Storm of Swords, a Feast for Crows, a Dance with Dragons.
Oh, Dance with Dragons.
And then the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring are still forthcoming.
Yes. And if George R.R. Martin will ever release his goddamn 2 books, I have a feeling he's writing both of them together and he's going to release them at the same time. Because usually the books had a couple years in between. These 2 are the longest gap in between other books. So I have a feeling he's writing both of them simultaneously and he's just going to publish them like back to back. Because
releases them.
Yeah.
What if he surprisingly releases them on, or like the week of, or the night of, like the series finale?
As much as I hate that, there's such a high possibility of that because George R. R. Martin writes all of his books on a DOS-2 computer that is not connected to the internet, that doesn't have the capability of being connected to the internet, so no one can leak any of his stuff. And he lives in like Phoenix, Arizona, or like Albuquerque, New Mexico. He lives in like, I think he lives in Phoenix, Arizona, in like a very normal house with his very normal wife. And I think he has like very normal kids. Like people see him at the grocery store and they talk to him. He's like, I'm not telling you about Game of Thrones. And he just like has a normal life. And he's probably one of now the most well-known artists and authors in the world. And he's just like, oh, hello, I'm George R. R. Martin. He doesn't even own a smartphone. Like, he didn't know what Instagram was until very recently, and I find that incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like him just living in that modest little home of his. You'd think, like, where is all your money going, dude? He has got to be rolling.
Oh, yeah. There's interviews with him in his house. He has, like, an action figure collection. His house looks like the apartment from the 40-Year-Old Virgin. Where he has like action figures and all this cool stuff that like is every 11-year-old boy's dream. And he's like, yeah, this is my home. I love all this stuff. And I'm like, you're awesome. Like you're the most wholesome person I've ever seen in my entire life. And you're the best. So shout out to George R. R. Martin for being incredible. Also, he helps write and direct these shows. So that's why they're so similar. But yeah, that's the first 2 seasons. We are going to do 2 seasons at a time until we get to the new show, and then we're going to start breaking down that. So for a little while, this podcast will be a Game of Thrones podcast, because it's not like this is one of the biggest TV events of all time. And you bet we're going to capitalize on that.
And yeah, and we ask that you bear with us, because there's going to be several instances of being like, as we progress through the seasons, we're going to be like, oh shit, we forgot to mention that way back in season 2 or something. Like, this is pretty fucking important.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I totally forgot that this giant thing happens. Yeah, that probably will happen 100 times in this. But I think we've gotten these first 2 seasons pretty well under wraps, like the big events.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ben, before we end, is there anything that you have
to shout out?
Yeah, is there a plug?
Thing I can think of. We are not sponsored by Jordan Peele's Us, but hey, go see it. Also, going way back to in this episode, we mentioned Robert Pattinson being in Christopher Nolan's next film. I want to plug a movie that he was in last year or in 2017. I think it was 2018. It's a film called Good Time, starring Robert Pattinson, and this movie's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And if you ever thought that Robert Pattinson was going to be kind of pigeonholed into his little Twilight, heartbreaker, not really the best acting he's ever done, see this movie because he's phenomenal in it.
Yes. I haven't seen it, but I will watch that. And my recommendation is another movie. It's on Netflix. If you live in the United States, I'm sure you can find it if you're in Australia, like on Stan, or I think that's in Europe as well. I think it's in Europe. But I think it's on Amazon Prime as well. It's called Swiss Army Man. It's with Daniel Radcliffe, and it's really good. I'm not going to say anything more about it because it would spoil what the film is about, but you should watch it. It's very interesting. It's kind of heartfelt, a little strange, but it's very, very well done. And that is my recommendation for this week. Ben, this is See What Sticks. I'm Russell. We have a website. We're on Spotify as well. Listen to us on Spotify. The song that you will hear at the end is by Dyalla. Look her up. She will be linked below with all of her social media stuff. Thank you to Dyalla for letting us use your music or segment of your music for this show. Ben, let's close us out.
As always, thank you guys so much for listening. We hope to catch you next week. Give Dyalla a listen. Give her a follow. Give her a like. Shout out to her. Again, thank you so much for letting us use your music for this show. I'm Ben. This has been See What Sticks, a podcast about everything and nothing. We'll see you next time.